I was quite old to start school. I was 17 and had never been to school before. We lived in the countryside, and my education was not very structured. Sometimes I studied, sometimes I played, sometimes we had guests, and sometimes we visited friends or family. This is what happens when you have a big family and do your studies at home, especially if you prefer doing things over thinking. I didn't like books very much. I preferred gardening, riding the pony, baking cakes, and taking care of the baby. My sisters were smarter than me, and I didn't think I could do well in subjects that required studying, so I focused on being good with my hands. But I didn't mind working. I did my lessons when I had to, although I was always ready to stop and do something else if needed. When my mother said I had to go to a good school for a year, I agreed. I always liked changes. I went to a big school called London High School, and I stayed with some people we knew. They weren't connected to the school, so I had to rely on myself a lot and figure things out on my own. I had to take a test before I could join the school, and I'll always remember how I felt that day. The headmistress seemed sharp and quick, and I thought she thought I was very dumb for my age. I was put in a room with many girls, most of them younger than me, and given some test papers to do. The questions were new to me, and I was nervous and worried. But I kept working hard, feeling like I was showing how little I knew for a 17-year-old, and worried I'd be put in a class with much younger students. There were two very pretty girls sitting next to me. They had curly black hair, bright faces, and lovely dark eyes. There was also a fair girl who wrote diligently the whole time and seemed to have no trouble. After the test, I asked her how she did, and she said it was easy and she answered most of the questions. When we compared our answers, I realized I must have been wrong because she was so sure she was right. I went home feeling very sad, but determined to work my way up from the bottom if I had to. The next morning, I prepared myself for what was coming and went to school. I had to take a bus, and I found one that came at the right time. When I arrived at the school entrance, a tall, thin lady with small features and glasses welcomed me. She spoke in a sharp, clear voice, but she was quite kind. She told me I was in the 5th form, and my desk was closest to the door. There was a lot of hustle and bustle as many new girls were there. I sat at my desk and wondered if the 5th form was the highest or the lowest. It was hard to believe I was in the highest form, but the other girls at their desks looked as old as me. The two pretty girls with dark hair were there, but I didn't see the fair girl who worked so easily. I waited and watched for her, and soon she came in, but she was moved to the form behind. She was in the 4th form, and I heard her name, Mabel Smith. At the end of the first term, I got a good report and went home happy. I was very happy to be home again because I had never been away for so long, and I found my little brothers had grown a lot. But the Christmas holidays ended quickly, and I went back to school in a cold, snowy week. London snow isn't like the beautiful, clean white snow that covers everything in the countryside. But I knew my way around by now and found my familiar bus waiting for me. The conductor greeted me warmly. He was very kind and always waited for me as long as he could. This term, we had a new teacher for math, and I didn't like her at all. I've always been very slow and not good at math, and the new teacher was so fast. She worked very quickly, and I couldn't keep up with her. She would go through a math problem in Euclid, proving that one figure was or wasn't equal to another, and I'd be left trying to understand the first proof when she was already onto the last one. Honestly, I didn't really care if one line could be proven equal to another or not. I thought it would be much easier to just measure it and be done with it. The same thing happened in arithmetic. She'd take us through countless step fractions with so many steps, as fast as she could write down the numbers. All I could do was stare blankly at the blackboard and hope that I could make sense of it all at home. She also gave us a lot of homework, so I had to work until after 10 at night, and then I'd have to leave some of my math problems unfinished or skip my other work altogether. I knew I was slow and not very good at math, but the other girls were struggling too, though not as much. Soon, all the other teachers started complaining that their work wasn't getting done, and all the girls had the same reason. The math took too long. So, Miss Vinton created a schedule for our homework and said we had to stop when the time was up, even if we weren't finished. It was such a relief. I was so stressed and overworked that my hair was turning gray. But I still struggled a lot with math, and I did really poorly on the end-of-term exam in math and French. Since most of us didn't do well in those subjects, our math and French teachers didn't come back the next term. Miss Vinton taught us math herself, and she was a great teacher. She helped me understand things better, even though I usually have a hard time with math. Her sister taught us French, and we started to improve a lot. Some of the girls had done well before because they sat near the French teacher and talked to her, but most of us hadn't learned much from her. I was sad to see the end of the school year approaching. I really wanted to do well on the final exams. They were going to be quite important because a university examiner was coming, and there were 2 prizes offered by people who cared about the school, one for the best literature paper and one for the best history. I really wanted to win a prize to bring home. The school was buzzing with excitement, and we all planned to do our best. The 4th and 5th forms were going to have the same tests, so the 4th form girls had a chance to win the prize too. Mabel Smith was determined to win the prize for literature. The exam week started. We had tests in geology, math, Latin, French, and German. We worked through them all diligently, but without much excitement. Then came the literature test, and you could hear the girls holding their breath as they got their papers. When I read the questions the first time, my head spun so much that I couldn't understand any of them. I have to calm down, I told myself, and I held onto my desk until I felt better. Then I read the questions again. I found one question I could answer right away, and after that, my brain cleared up and I knew the answers to all of them. Alice Thompson was sitting next to me. She was one of the pretty dark-haired girls, but she was very lazy. "What's the date of Paradise Lost?" she whispered. I didn't know what to do. I stayed quiet because I knew it was not right of her to ask, but I also knew the date and felt it would be unkind not to help her. Just then, Miss Vinton walked up and looked around the room. Alice focused on her work as Miss Vinton passed by. When Miss Vinton went back, Alice moved closer to me, asking with her pretty dark eyes. I hesitated. Then I slid the paper I had just finished closer to her so she could see the date, which she did quickly. After that, she looked over my papers whenever Miss Vinton wasn't watching. I was a bit worried about it, but I didn't think she could win the prize since I knew she hadn't studied the subject. If she didn't win, I thought it wouldn't matter much. I had finished answering all the questions well before the time was up. I thought we had been given too much time, so I was surprised to see Mabel Smith and a few others writing frantically until the last minute. Eventually, the time was up and we all handed in our papers. "How did you do, Margaret?" asked Miss Vinton, smiling kindly at me. "I think I got all the answers right," I replied. "That's good," she said. The next day, we were given the history paper, and it made me feel hopeless. The questions were tricky, and short answers wouldn't be enough. I was scared to write down my own ideas. But after a while, I started to get some ideas, and I enjoyed writing them down. Alice had been moved to a different desk, so I was able to focus. My friend Joyce was sitting next to me, quietly working. I was doing well when suddenly the bell rang, and I had only answered 3/4 of the questions. I was upset because I could see a few more questions I could have answered, but there was nothing I could do about it. I had to turn in my papers. "I wish I had a bit more time," I told Miss Vinton as I handed in my work. "You had the same amount of time as everyone else," she replied, sounding a bit sharp. I left feeling sad and embarrassed. The exams were done, and we would find out the results the next day. None of us really wanted that extra half-hour of sleep in the morning, which usually seemed so nice. We all gathered in the cloakroom, chatting away because the rules were relaxed. When the school bell rang, we hurried to our places. Miss Vinton gave us a speech, saying that the exam results were good overall, and our work during the term had been satisfactory. We were all eager to hear the results, but Miss Vinton's general remarks didn't hold our attention for long. Finally, she announced the winners. Alice Thompson won the Literature Prize. Her work was accurate and well-written. We were all shocked into silence. Alice turned red with embarrassment. I felt terrible for letting her copy my work. Mabel Smith looked pale, but Miss Vinton continued calmly. Mabel Smith comes next. Her paper was very well written, but there were a few mistakes that placed her below Alice. Then she called out the names of the other students, including Nellie, Joyce, and the rest of the 5th form, and a couple from the 4th form. I started to recover from the surprise of Alice's win and began to wonder about my own results. Finally, my name was called, but I only got half marks. I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment. I was so disappointed and ashamed. Miss Vinton could see how I felt and stopped to explain that the examiner wasn't just looking for simple answers with dates and names. They wanted well-written essays that showed thought and intelligence. That's where I went wrong, while Alice, copying my facts, managed to write them out well and came in first. I felt really upset about it and almost forgot about the unfairness to Mabel Smith. The excitement rose again when Miss Vinton announced the winner of the History Prize. The History Prize goes to Nellie Gascoigne for her excellent paper. Margaret and Joyce are tied for second place. Their papers were also excellent, just a little behind Nellie's. I couldn't believe it. I had left so many questions unanswered. I never thought I'd do well in history. This made me feel a bit better about my earlier disappointment. But then I remembered the issue with the Literature Prize. After the morning's announcements, Mabel Smith grabbed my arm urgently. "We need to talk," she said. "Let's go to the cloakroom," I replied. "We can grab our books later," I suggested. "You know Alice Thompson cheated," Mabel began as soon as we were alone. "I sat right behind and saw you slide your papers over to her, and she copied whatever she needed." "I never thought she'd win the prize," I admitted. "I just wanted to help her out. But she did win it, and it's my prize. What are you going to do about it?" "I'm not sure. I know I shouldn't have let her copy, but I didn't think it would cause any harm. Now you have to tell Miss Vinton. It's not fair that I should lose the prize I worked so hard for just because she cheated." "I wish you hadn't seen," I replied. "But regardless, Alice wouldn't have won if she hadn't cheated, and you need to tell Miss Vinton." "Oh, that's too much," I cried out. "It's Alice who should tell Miss Vinton, not me. I can't do it. I'm ready to tell Alice that she has to." Mabel looked at me sternly. "And if she refuses?" she asked. "Then I'm not sure what we can do," I admitted. "You're going to let her keep my prize?" Mabel pressed. "Well, you could tell Miss Vinton if you want," I suggested. "You're the one who should tell her. It's all your fault. You had no right to help Alice cheat," Mabel accused. "I know that's true," I conceded, "but it just makes it even harder for me to report her." Just then, Alice walked in. "Oh, Margaret," she exclaimed. Then she noticed Mabel and paused. "Are you going to tell Miss Vinton you cheated?" Mabel asked, approaching her with angry eyes. "Margaret, did you tell?" Alice inquired. "I saw you," Mabel interjected. "I sat just behind and saw you. You're not going to try to keep my prize, are you?" "No, of course not," replied Alice. "I never aimed to get the prize. I just wanted to write a good paper and avoid getting scolded by Miss Vinton as usual. You can have the prize if you want." Mabel remained silent. "I'm afraid that won't quite work," I remarked. It would be too hard for Mabel to explain at home without exposing what you did. It's better if you confess on your own." "I can't," Alice admitted. "I regret it so much now, but I can't face Miss Vinton." She looked like she might cry. Well, I'll have to confess too, I decided. It was partly my fault. Let's go together. I'm too scared, Alice admitted, but I could see she was starting to give in. Come along, I said, taking her arm. It's the only way out. You know you won't keep Mabel's prize, and it's as bad to keep her honor and glory. This is the only way out. Let's get it over. She came then, but reluctantly. Fortunately, we found Miss Vinton alone in her room, and between us, we managed to stammer out our confession. Miss Vinton, I think, was not surprised. She had feared there was something not quite right, but she was very stern with us both, as much with me as with Alice, and as it was to be my last meeting with her, I was heartbroken. However, I lingered a moment after Alice, and then turned back and said, "Please forgive me. You can't think how sorry I am." "Remember, Margaret," she replied, "that it is not enough to be honest in your own actions. You must also discourage anything dishonest in others. I know you wouldn't cheat yourself, but if cheating is wrong, it's just as wrong to help someone else to cheat. Do you understand? Will you remember this in the future, in big things as well as in small? You must not only do right yourself. Your influence must also be on the side of what's right. Of course, I forgive you. You've been a good girl all this year, and I'm sorry to see you go." So I left feeling comforted, and I returned home without a prize to show. But I had something better. I had developed a genuine love of learning that has stayed with me. I don't know what happened to Alice Thompson. I just hope she never had to make a living by teaching. Nellie Gascoigne went back to her cheerful family of brothers and sisters and embraced the joys and responsibilities of home life. Joyce became an assistant teacher in a school, and Mabel continued her academic success by earning a scholarship to Cambridge a year later. And me, well, I've never been the top achiever, but I'm quite content with second place.